America's black budget, secret intelligence spending, and the oversight question. The hearing room is quiet, but not empty. Microphones sit ready. Folders are stacked in neat piles. On the wall behind the witnesses, the seal of the United States government rests above rows of seats that will soon be filled with senators, aides, and cameras. In front of each lawmaker is a thick binder labeled Budget Overview. Inside those binders, page after page breaks down spending in extraordinary detail. Agriculture, transportation, education, health programs, infrastructure, line items, subcategories, footnotes. Every dollar appears to have a place. And then, near the back of the document, a smaller section. National Intelligence Program, Military Intelligence Program, Classified Annex. A number is printed, but beneath it, there is no public explanation of how it is divided. No public list of projects. No public contracts. No public accounting of specific programs. The figure can run into tens of billions annually. Within the broader Department of Defense structure, total spending can exceed hundreds of billions each year. And across decades, those totals accumulate into the trillions. The question that follows is simple, but difficult to answer. Where does that money go? This is the subject often referred to as the black budget. Not a secret budget in the sense that its existence is denied, but a classified portion of federal spending whose internal details are not disclosed to the public. Governments around the world maintain classified expenditures for intelligence and national security. The United States is no exception. Certain operations are considered too sensitive to describe openly. Intelligence sources, surveillance methods, covert missions, and advanced weapons systems are often protected from disclosure under national security laws. This documentary examines how that system developed, why it operates the way it does, and why debate continues about the limits of secrecy. It draws from historical records, government reports, investigative journalism, and decades of public discussion. It does not assert hidden programs as fact. It explores documented structures and the questions that surround them. At the center of the issue lies a tension that has shaped American governance since the mid-20th century. How does a democratic society balance transparency with secrecy? To understand how classified spending became embedded in federal budgeting, it is necessary to return to the years immediately following World War II. The global order had shifted. Nuclear weapons had been introduced. The alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union had dissolved into rivalry. Intelligence gathering was no longer a supporting function of war. It became a permanent feature of national defense strategy. In 1947, Congress passed the National Security Act. The legislation reorganized the military establishment and formally created institutions that would define the modern security state. Among them was the Central Intelligence Agency, tasked with coordinating foreign intelligence. The act also established the National Security Council and reorganized the armed services under what would become the Department of Defense. Shortly after, the signals intelligence capabilities that had been scattered across wartime agencies were consolidated, eventually leading to the formation of the National Security Agency in 1952. These agencies were born into a world defined by secrecy. The Cold War was not only a military confrontation, but an intelligence contest. Espionage, counterintelligence, covert operations, psychological warfare, and classified research became central components of strategy. The early Cold War climate was characterized by suspicion and urgency. The Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb in 1949. The Korean War began in 1950. In Washington, fears of infiltration and subversion took hold. The era commonly associated with McCarthyism intensified the belief that threats could emerge from within as well as abroad. In that environment, secrecy was framed not as an exception, but as a necessity. Intelligence operations required concealment. New weapon systems required classified testing. Research into advanced aerospace, cryptography, and electronic surveillance required protection from foreign adversaries. Budgeting practices adapted accordingly. While the Constitution grants Congress the power of the purse, not all appropriations were itemized for public release. Instead, funds for intelligence activities were often embedded within larger defense accounts. Details were restricted to select members of Congress with security clearances. This process did not emerge overnight. It developed incrementally. During the 1950s and 1960s, covert operations were conducted in various parts of the world, including Iran, Guatemala, Cuba, and Southeast Asia. Many of these operations were not publicly acknowledged at the time. Funding mechanisms were structured to limit exposure. As the intelligence community expanded, so did the complexity of its financial architecture. Classified annexes were attached to budget bills. Special access programs were established for particularly sensitive initiatives. These programs limited knowledge not only from the public, but often from other government officials without direct involvement. By the 1970s, a series of revelations began to shift public perception. Investigative reporting uncovered surveillance activities conducted against American citizens. Congressional investigations, including the Church Committee hearings, examined intelligence abuses. The response to those revelations was reform. Permanent intelligence oversight committees were established in both the Senate and the House of Representatives. The intent was to create structured, institutional accountability for agencies operating in secrecy. But even as oversight mechanisms evolved, the classified budget itself remained largely opaque to the public. Lawmakers with appropriate clearance could review details. The broader population could not. The justification was consistent. Certain knowledge, if widely disclosed, could compromise national security. Intelligence sources might be exposed. Ongoing operations might be disrupted. Technological advantages might be lost. At the same time, the structure of classified spending created inherent limitations. Because detailed line items were not publicly debated, citizens could not easily evaluate how funds were allocated within those categories. Because programs were compartmentalized, only a small subset of officials had access to comprehensive information. Over time, the scale of defense and intelligence spending grew substantially. The Cold War arms race drove rapid investment in nuclear arsenals, missile systems, satellite reconnaissance, and early digital surveillance technologies. Research and development became a significant component of the defense budget. Many of these projects were visible. Aircraft carriers, fighter jets, and overseas bases were publicly acknowledged. Others were not. Experimental aircraft, stealth programs, signals intelligence infrastructure, and cyber capabilities often remained classified for years, sometimes decades. The term black budget emerged informally to describe those portions of spending that were shielded from public breakdown. It was not an official category printed in legislation. It became shorthand among journalists, analysts, and critics for funds whose internal allocation was unknown outside secure channels. Importantly, the existence of classified spending was not hidden. What remained hidden were the details. Throughout the 1980s, the defense buildup under President Reagan accelerated funding for intelligence and advanced weapons systems. At the same time, the Iran-Contra affair revealed how covert activities could intersect with complex financial arrangements. Although that scandal centered on arms sales and foreign policy decisions rather than formal budget appropriations, it intensified public awareness of how secret operations could operate within or alongside official channels. By the 1990s, the Cold War had ended, but intelligence budgets did not disappear. They shifted focus. Counterterrorism, regional instability, cybersecurity, and emerging technological threats became priorities. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, the intelligence apparatus expanded significantly. New agencies were formed. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence was established to coordinate across the intelligence community. Counterterrorism funding increased. Surveillance authorities were broadened under legislation, such as the Patriot Act. In the years that followed, aggregate figures for the National Intelligence Program began to be publicly disclosed. For the first time, citizens could see a top-line number representing total intelligence spending. However, the detailed breakdown of specific programs remained classified. This hybrid transparency created a unique situation. The public could see that tens of billions were allocated annually to intelligence activities. But the public could not see precisely how those billions were distributed among programs, contractors, technologies, or operations. Within Congress, oversight was conducted through select committees. Members of those committees received classified briefings. Inspectors general within agencies conducted internal reviews. The Government Accountability Office maintained auditing authority in certain areas. Yet, the broader democratic public, whose tax dollars funded the system, relied largely on trust. The possibility of controversy arises from that gap. When any institution manages vast sums of money outside full public visibility, questions naturally follow. How robust is oversight? How frequently are programs reviewed? How are errors corrected? How are abuses prevented? In the case of the Department of Defense, additional complexity has emerged from repeated audit challenges. In recent years, the department has publicly acknowledged difficulty passing comprehensive financial audits due to the scale and fragmentation of its accounting systems. These admissions have fueled debate, even though audit failure does not necessarily imply missing funds. The environment in which the black budget operates is therefore layered. On one level, it is a formally recognized mechanism within national security governance. On another, it is a space where secrecy intersects with enormous financial scale. Secrecy can be justified by strategic necessity, but secrecy also limits external scrutiny. That tension has persisted for more than 70 years. It began in a world shaped by nuclear rivalry and espionage. It continues in a digital age defined by cyber warfare, satellite surveillance, artificial intelligence, and globalized defense contracting. As the federal budget has grown, so too has the portion designated for national defense and intelligence. Over decades, cumulative classified expenditures reach into the trillions. That number alone can appear abstract, difficult to conceptualize. For some observers, it represents the unavoidable cost of maintaining global security commitments. For others, it represents a domain where too much remains unseen. Before exploring those debates, it is important to understand that the black budget did not arise from a single hidden decision. It developed through legislation, executive authority, and bipartisan consensus around the necessity of classified operations. It evolved through wars, geopolitical crises, technological revolutions, and intelligence reforms. Its existence is acknowledged. Its details are restricted. And within that distinction lies the central question that will guide this investigation. In a system built on democratic accountability, how much secrecy is compatible with public trust? The answer is not simple. It requires examining the official framework, the oversight mechanisms designed to regulate it, and the historical reasons for its expansion. Only then can we understand why, for decades, the black budget has remained both a documented reality and a source of enduring controversy. The official narrative. In formal terms, there is no single line in federal law labeled black budget. The phrase is informal. The official terminology refers instead to classified appropriations within the broader federal budget, particularly under the categories known as the National Intelligence Program, or NIP, and the Military Intelligence Program, or MIP. Each year, the executive branch submits a proposed federal budget to Congress. Within that proposal, defense and intelligence funding occupies a substantial share. The majority of Department of Defense spending is publicly itemized. However, a portion is placed into classified annexes that are not released to the general public. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence, often referred to as ODNI, is responsible for coordinating the National Intelligence Program across multiple agencies. Since 2007, the ODNI has publicly released the total top-line figure for the NIP each fiscal year. This number represents the aggregate funding for intelligence activities across agencies, including the Central Intelligence Agency, National Security Agency, National Reconnaissance Office, Defense Intelligence Agency, and others. The Military Intelligence Program, managed by the Department of Defense, accounts for intelligence activities conducted within the military services. Its top-line number is also released annually. In recent years, the combined NIP and MIP totals have ranged in the tens of billions of dollars annually. Over time, these annual figures accumulate into large totals. But from the official standpoint, the existence of large sums is not concealed. What remains classified are the specific program allocations beneath those totals. The official narrative emphasizes that classified budgeting is not outside the law. It is embedded within statutory frameworks and subject to oversight structures designed specifically for sensitive information. Within Congress, oversight responsibility falls primarily to two standing committees: the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Members of these committees receive classified briefings. Staff members working for the committees must hold appropriate security clearances. The committees review budget requests, examine proposed programs, and authorize funding levels before appropriations are finalized. In addition to the intelligence committees, certain subcommittees within the House and Senate Appropriations Committees oversee classified spending. These appropriations subcommittees examine the detailed classified annexes attached to defense and intelligence bills. The annexes include program descriptions, funding justifications, and internal allocations. From the official perspective, this layered review ensures that elected representatives, not unelected officials, control the purse strings. The executive branch maintains its own internal controls. Each major intelligence agency has an Office of Inspector General tasked with auditing programs, investigating misconduct, and reviewing compliance with law and policy. These inspectors general can conduct classified investigations and report findings to Congress. The Government Accountability Office, commonly known as GAO, also plays a role, although its access to certain highly classified programs may be restricted depending on statutory authority and executive branch determinations. The official framework describes a system of checks and balances within secrecy. The public cannot see operational details, but cleared representatives can. According to this narrative, secrecy is limited to operational protection, not financial absence. Classified annexes are central to this structure. When Congress passes annual defense authorization and appropriations bills, it includes both public and classified components. The classified annex contains the granular details of intelligence funding, project names, technical objectives, procurement plans, and specific dollar amounts tied to individual programs. These annexes are distributed only to members and staff with appropriate clearance. The rationale provided by the executive branch and by many members of Congress is consistent. Revealing the details of intelligence spending could reveal capabilities. For example, if a foreign adversary learned the precise funding allocated to a specific signals intelligence system, they might infer its scale, geographic coverage, or technical sophistication. If a covert operations budget line were public, it could expose the operation's existence. This logic extends to research and development programs. Advanced weapons platforms, satellite technologies, cyber capabilities, and cryptographic systems are often funded under classified programs. Their disclosure could, in theory, compromise strategic advantage. Historically, certain programs that were once classified have later become public knowledge. The development of stealth aircraft in the 1980s, for instance, was initially hidden within classified accounts before public acknowledgement. Satellite reconnaissance programs were similarly secret for years before declassification revealed their existence. The official position holds that classified budgeting has repeatedly enabled the United States to develop technological capabilities without prematurely exposing them to adversaries. Since 2010, public transparency regarding aggregate intelligence spending has modestly increased. Following legal challenges and public pressure, the executive branch began releasing the overall NIP and MIP figures. Declassified budget summaries from prior decades have also been released in limited form. These documents provide insight into how intelligence spending was distributed across agencies during certain periods, although detailed line items often remain redacted. From the official standpoint, these disclosures demonstrate a balance between transparency and operational security. Citizens can see how much is spent in total. Cleared officials can see how it is spent in detail. Adversaries cannot see sensitive allocations. Oversight hearings occur regularly, though most are conducted in closed session. Directors of intelligence agencies testify before Congress, both publicly and behind closed doors. Budget justifications are debated internally. Amendments are proposed. Funding levels are adjusted. Another component of the official narrative involves the appropriations process itself. No intelligence agency can legally spend funds that have not been appropriated by Congress. Even classified programs must be authorized and funded through formal legislation. This requirement anchors the black budget within constitutional authority. In addition, intelligence agencies operate under legal constraints defined by statute and executive order. Surveillance activities are governed by laws such as the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Covert actions must be authorized through presidential findings and reported to congressional intelligence committees. These mechanisms, according to the official narrative, prevent unilateral or unaccountable spending. Critics sometimes point to the scale of defense spending overall, which can exceed $800 billion annually when combining base budgets and supplemental funding. However, the official distinction is important. Not all defense spending is classified. The vast majority is publicly itemized, including personnel costs, procurement, operations, and maintenance. The classified portion represents a subset tied specifically to intelligence and certain advanced programs. Another point emphasized in official explanations is the difference between black programs and black accounts. A black program refers to a classified project whose details are restricted. A black account implies funds that are entirely off the books. The government maintains that black programs exist, but black accounts, money spent without legal authorization or record, do not. Recent audit challenges within the Department of Defense have complicated public understanding. The department has acknowledged difficulty in passing full financial audits due to legacy accounting systems and fragmented record-keeping across thousands of facilities and contractors. Headlines have sometimes framed these audit failures as evidence of missing trillions of dollars. The official response clarifies that audit failures do not indicate missing funds in the conventional sense. Instead, they reflect incomplete documentation, incompatible accounting systems, and the immense complexity of tracking assets across a global military infrastructure. Unsupported adjustments in accounting language, officials argue, do not equal untraceable cash. From within the intelligence community, there is also the argument that secrecy can sometimes protect oversight itself. Sensitive oversight findings may be classified not to shield wrongdoing, but to prevent disclosure of vulnerabilities or methods. Declassified historical records provide examples of both secrecy and correction. The Church Committee investigations in the 1970s exposed intelligence abuses, leading to structural reforms. In the decades since, oversight committees have cited instances where programs were modified or terminated following review. The official narrative therefore rests on several core claims. First, classified spending is legally authorized and constitutionally grounded. Second, oversight exists through cleared representatives and inspectors general. Third, aggregate budget transparency has increased over time. Fourth, secrecy protects operational effectiveness, not financial absence. Fifth, audit challenges reflect complexity rather than concealment. Supporters of this framework argue that national security would be compromised by full public disclosure. Intelligence, by definition, relies on concealment. If adversaries can map capabilities precisely, deterrence weakens. The system's defenders also emphasize the role of elected officials. Members of Congress, accountable to voters, are entrusted with reviewing classified expenditures. While the public cannot access every detail, the public elects those who can. There is also an international context. Nearly all major powers maintain classified intelligence budgets. The United Kingdom, France, China, and Russia do not publish granular intelligence line items. From a comparative standpoint, the United States' release of aggregate figures is presented as relatively transparent. Yet the official narrative acknowledges tension. Even government reports occasionally note the difficulty of reconciling transparency with secrecy in a democracy. Congressional debates have addressed whether more summary-level information could be disclosed without compromising operations. In some cases, programs once considered too sensitive to discuss have later been acknowledged publicly. Cyber operations, once rarely referenced, are now openly discussed at high levels, though operational specifics remain classified. The evolution suggests that secrecy is not static. Programs may move from classified to unclassified status as strategic contexts change. Still, the fundamental structure remains intact. A portion of federal spending is classified. It is debated behind closed doors. It is reviewed by select lawmakers. It is justified as necessary for national defense. Under the official narrative, there is no mystery about whether the black budget exists. It does. There is no denial that it is large. It is. The assertion instead is that its size reflects the scale of global responsibilities and technological competition. What remains outside public view is not, according to this explanation, evidence of absence or concealment of funds. It is evidence of operational secrecy. Whether that balance satisfies public expectations is another matter. But from the standpoint of law and institutional structure, the black budget is described not as a hidden treasury, but as a classified segment of a publicly authorized system. This is the framework that underpins the official account. It defines the boundaries within which the intelligence community operates. It explains why aggregate numbers are visible while internal details are not. It asserts that oversight exists, even if it is not fully public. In the next section, we turn to how and when skepticism began to grow around that framework, and how early critics interpreted the same structures in very different ways. The first wave of conspiracy theories. By the time aggregate intelligence budget numbers began appearing in public reports, suspicions surrounding classified spending had already been building for decades. The first wave of conspiracy theories about what would later be labeled the black budget did not begin on internet forums. They emerged during periods when public trust in government institutions was already under strain. The 1970s marked a turning point. The Vietnam War had ended in controversy. The Watergate scandal had revealed executive misconduct at the highest levels of government. Investigative journalism was expanding. Congressional investigations into intelligence agencies were underway. The Senate Select Committee to Study Governmental Operations with Respect to Intelligence Activities, commonly known as the Church Committee, uncovered a series of covert actions and domestic surveillance programs that had not been publicly disclosed. These included operations targeting civil rights leaders, anti-war activists, and foreign governments. For many Americans, the revelation was not merely that secrecy existed. It was that secrecy had shielded activities that were ethically and legally questionable. In that environment, classified spending began to take on new meaning. If intelligence agencies had conducted undisclosed operations in the past, critics asked, what else might be hidden? Early skepticism focused less on fantastical ideas and more on structural concerns. Journalists and policy analysts began examining how intelligence funds were allocated. Because detailed budget breakdowns were unavailable, estimates were pieced together from fragments, public defense appropriations, declassified documents, and testimony from former officials. The lack of transparency created interpretive space. Without public line items, observers had to infer how money might be flowing. Some of the earliest claims centered on covert foreign interventions. If funding for operations in Iran in 1953 or Guatemala in 1954 had been classified, what other activities might be financed without public awareness? The Iran-Contra affair in the 1980s intensified these questions. The scandal involved the secret sale of arms to Iran, with proceeds allegedly diverted to support Contra rebels in Nicaragua. Although the mechanism did not revolve solely around formal appropriations, the episode reinforced a broader perception. Complex financial arrangements could exist within or alongside official channels. For critics, this was evidence that secrecy and money could intersect in ways that bypassed public accountability. Now, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, as Cold War tensions eased, a different form of suspicion began to emerge. With the Soviet Union dissolving, some commentators questioned why defense and intelligence budgets remained substantial. If the primary geopolitical rival had collapsed, why did classified spending not decline proportionally? It was during this period that the phrase black projects gained wider circulation in popular discourse. The term referred to classified aerospace and weapons development programs. Investigative journalists had uncovered programs such as stealth aircraft development that had been funded under secret accounts for years before public acknowledgement. The fact that such programs existed and were concealed for strategic reasons demonstrated that large-scale initiatives could operate without public awareness. For some observers, that realization expanded into broader speculation. If stealth aircraft had been hidden successfully, what else might be concealed? Writers in alternative publications began advancing claims that classified budgets could be supporting entire parallel research infrastructures. These claims ranged from secret propulsion systems to underground facilities. At this stage, however, the theories were generally tied to tangible historical precedents. The existence of classified weapons programs was not disputed. The debate concerned scope. Some former defense insiders and whistleblowers alleged that unacknowledged special access programs existed beyond even the standard classified structure. These programs, they claimed, were so restricted that only a handful of officials knew their full scope. Special access programs, or SAPs, are a documented category within national security operations. They impose additional controls beyond standard classification. Their existence is acknowledged in general terms. The leap occurred when commentators suggested that certain SAPs might not be fully disclosed, even to congressional oversight committees. These claims were difficult to verify, but they gained traction among audiences already skeptical of institutional transparency. Cultural context played a significant role. The late 20th century saw a surge in popular media focused on secrecy and hidden power structures. Films and television shows portrayed shadow governments, covert agencies, and classified research facilities. Fiction and reality began to overlap in the public imagination. The end of the Cold War did not eliminate geopolitical tension. Instead, it shifted focus to new threats: terrorism, cyber warfare, rogue states. Each new security challenge provided justification for continued classified spending. At the same time, the rise of talk radio and independent publishing allowed alternative narratives to circulate more widely. By the early 1990s, claims began appearing that trillions of dollars might be unaccounted for within defense spending. These assertions often drew from misunderstandings of accounting language, particularly references to unsupported adjustments in financial statements. While official explanations described these adjustments as technical accounting discrepancies, critics framed them as evidence of missing funds. The scale of defense spending amplified these concerns. When annual budgets approach or exceed hundreds of billions of dollars, even small percentages represent large sums. The abstraction of these numbers made them difficult to contextualize. Another catalyst was the consolidation of defense contracting. Major private companies became deeply integrated into intelligence and military projects. Because many contracts were classified, the financial relationships between government and contractor were not fully visible. This fostered a narrative that classified budgets might be fueling a closed ecosystem of government and private industry insulated from public scrutiny. In the late 1990s, the internet began accelerating the spread of these ideas. Early online forums allowed individuals to share declassified documents, archived reports, and speculative analysis. Importantly, the first wave of conspiracy theories did not yet revolve around extraterrestrials or vast hidden civilizations. Those narratives would become more prominent later. The early stage was rooted in governance concerns. Critics questioned whether congressional oversight committees had sufficient information. They wondered whether classified annexes could obscure controversial projects. They debated whether the public release of aggregate intelligence budgets was sufficient transparency. Some scholars argued that democracy requires not only representation, but informed consent. If citizens cannot see how funds are allocated, can they meaningfully evaluate policy? Others countered that intelligence inherently requires secrecy, and that representative oversight satisfies constitutional requirements. The debate remained largely within policy circles until the events of September 11, 2001. The terrorist attacks reshaped national security priorities overnight. Intelligence budgets expanded significantly. Surveillance authorities broadened. Counterterrorism funding surged. As classified spending increased, so did suspicion. New laws allowed enhanced monitoring capabilities. Classified programs related to data collection and signals intelligence expanded. When later disclosures revealed the scope of certain surveillance activities, public trust was further strained. For some observers, this confirmed earlier suspicions. Secrecy could conceal programs that might not withstand public debate. The language surrounding the black budget evolved accordingly. It became less about isolated covert operations and more about systemic opacity. Advocates of transparency argued that even if secrecy was justified operationally, financial oversight should be more robust. Skeptics, meanwhile, interpreted audit failures and redactions as signs of deeper concealment. By the early 2000s, the first wave of conspiracy theories had crystallized around several recurring themes. That classified budgets might fund operations beyond public knowledge, that oversight committees might lack full access, that defense contractors might operate within a self-reinforcing network of classified contracts, that accounting discrepancies might mask diverted or misallocated funds. At this stage, the theories remained grounded in institutional critique rather than grand cosmological narratives. They drew strength from historical precedent. Intelligence abuses had been documented in the past. Covert actions had been hidden. Programs had been classified for decades before acknowledgement. The logical progression for critics was straightforward. If secrecy had concealed controversial programs before, it could do so again. What distinguished the first wave from later iterations was its focus on process rather than spectacle. The core question was not, what extraordinary secret is being hidden, but how much do we truly know about where classified money goes? The ambiguity inherent in classified budgeting provided no simple answer. Without public line item breakdowns, citizens had limited tools to verify official claims. They could see totals. They could read oversight reports in summary form, but they could not examine the details directly. In the absence of direct access, interpretation filled the gap. By the time the internet era fully matured, these early suspicions had laid the groundwork for broader narratives. But at their origin, the first wave of conspiracy theories about the black budget emerged from a specific historical moment, an era defined by revealed abuses, expanding secrecy, and growing demand for accountability. They did not arise from imagination alone. They arose from documented secrecy colliding with democratic expectation. And as the scale of classified spending grew, so did the question that continues to echo. If so much remains unseen, how can the public measure what lies within it? Evidence and patterns cited by supporters. By the time public debate around the black budget matured in the early 2000s, the discussion had shifted from abstract concern to the interpretation of specific documents, audit language, and testimony. Supporters of expanded scrutiny often point to material that is, at least in part, publicly accessible. The argument is rarely framed as pure speculation. Instead, it draws on official reports, redactions, accounting terminology, and statements from insiders. One of the most frequently referenced categories of evidence involves financial audits within the Department of Defense. In recent years, the Department of Defense has publicly acknowledged difficulty passing comprehensive audits. The scale of the department is enormous. It oversees hundreds of thousands of personnel, manages global installations, and contracts with thousands of private companies. Its financial systems evolved over decades and often operate on incompatible legacy software platforms. In audit terminology, the phrase unsupported adjustments refers to accounting entries that cannot be fully reconciled with supporting documentation at the time of review. In public headlines, this language has sometimes been interpreted as evidence of missing trillions. Supporters of deeper investigation argue that even if the technical meaning of unsupported differs from missing, the presence of large discrepancies suggests structural opacity. They ask how such vast sums can move through systems without perfect documentation. They question whether audit failures create opportunities for concealment within classified segments of the budget. It is important to distinguish clearly. Verified fact is that the Department of Defense has struggled to produce a clean audit opinion. Verified fact is also that intelligence budget details are classified beyond aggregate totals. What remains disputed is whether these two realities intersect in ways that conceal unauthorized spending. Another category of cited material involves redacted Inspector General reports. Intelligence agencies maintain internal watchdog offices. When these offices release public summaries of investigations, portions are often blacked out for national security reasons. Supporters of black budget scrutiny argue that heavy redaction fuels suspicion. If oversight findings are classified, they contend, the public cannot evaluate whether problems are minor administrative errors or systemic issues. Whistleblower testimony forms another pillar of evidence cited by proponents of further transparency. Over the decades, former intelligence officials have occasionally described unacknowledged special access programs, sometimes abbreviated as USAPS. Special access programs are a recognized classification category that impose additional controls beyond standard classified information. The existence of SAPs is acknowledged in official documentation. Their contents are typically not. Certain former officials have suggested that some programs are so tightly compartmentalized that even congressional committees may receive only limited information. Here again, the distinction between verified and disputed claims is central. Verified fact: special access programs exist and are used for highly sensitive operations. Disputed claim that certain programs operate entirely outside congressional awareness or legal authorization. Speculation that entire parallel infrastructures are funded without constitutional oversight. Supporters of scrutiny frequently cite patterns rather than singular events. For example, the consolidation of intelligence funding into broad categories makes it difficult for outside observers to track how funds shift over time. Budget lines labeled other defense activities or classified programs provide aggregate totals without detail. Critics argue that such aggregation prevents meaningful public analysis. Media investigations have occasionally revealed projects that were previously classified. Satellite reconnaissance programs, stealth aircraft development, and certain cyber initiatives were funded for years before public acknowledgement. When these programs were eventually declassified, they demonstrated that significant technological efforts can operate beyond public visibility for extended periods. Supporters of black budget examination argue that these historical precedents show how classified spending can conceal large-scale operations without public awareness. Another frequently referenced pattern involves defense contracting. Major private corporations receive substantial classified contracts for intelligence and military projects. Because contract details are often restricted, public databases may show only partial information. Critics contend that this creates a financial ecosystem in which public funds flow through private entities with limited transparency. Verified fact: defense contractors receive classified contracts. Disputed claim that contractors act as conduits for off-the-books funding streams. Speculation that private entities operate quasi-autonomous programs insulated from both public and congressional oversight. Accounting language has also played a central role in shaping perception. In several widely circulated reports, references to trillions in unsupported adjustments have been interpreted by some commentators as evidence that vast sums cannot be traced. Budget experts counter that adjustments often reflect reconciliation between incompatible accounting systems, rather than physical cash discrepancies. Supporters of further inquiry respond that even technical accounting limitations reveal structural weakness. If reconciliation processes are incomplete, they argue, opportunities for misallocation exist. Another source of debate is the classification of entire program categories. When Congress passes defense legislation, classified annexes outline detailed allocations. These annexes are not publicly accessible. Supporters of transparency argue that without access to annexes, citizens must rely entirely on trust. Some commentators emphasize that even within Congress, access is limited to specific members and staff with clearance. They question whether the small number of individuals with full visibility is sufficient for robust oversight. Media omissions are also cited as evidence. Supporters argue that mainstream news outlets often report aggregate intelligence spending without examining deeper structural issues. They contend that complex accounting language discourages sustained coverage. Redacted documents, technical terminology, and closed hearings create barriers to investigative journalism. This perceived absence of sustained public scrutiny reinforces suspicion among certain audiences. Symbolic interpretations further shape the narrative. The term black in black budget carries connotations beyond classification. For some, it suggests invisibility, unaccountability, or shadow authority. Geographic clustering of classified facilities, remote testing sites, secure compounds, restricted airspace, adds visual reinforcement to the idea of hidden infrastructure. Again, distinctions matter. Verified fact, classified facilities and restricted sites exist. Disputed claim that such facilities house unauthorized programs beyond legal oversight. Speculation that classified funds support extraordinary projects unrelated to acknowledged defense objectives. Certain anomalies in budget growth patterns are also cited. For example, intelligence spending surged significantly after September 11, 2001. While official explanations tie this increase to counterterrorism expansion, critics argue that rapid growth in classified funding reduces external scrutiny. Patterns of sustained spending after specific threats diminish are similarly questioned. Why, some ask, does intelligence funding remain high even as geopolitical landscapes shift? Budget experts respond that intelligence agencies adapt to emerging threats. Cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, space-based systems, requiring ongoing investment. Supporters of scrutiny argue that perpetual threat framing can justify indefinite expansion. Another area of discussion involves redacted Freedom of Information Act releases. When citizens request documents related to classified programs, responses often contain extensive blacked-out sections. Supporters interpret heavy redaction as evidence that significant information is withheld. Agencies respond that redaction protects sensitive methods, sources, and technologies. The presence of redaction itself becomes part of the narrative. It is also important to acknowledge the role of scale. Over decades, cumulative defense and intelligence spending reaches into the trillions of dollars. Large numbers can create cognitive dissonance. When figures are difficult to conceptualize, they can appear abstract or suspect. Supporters argue that democratic oversight requires proportional transparency. If spending is vast, scrutiny should be equally robust. Critics of conspiracy framing caution that scale alone does not imply misconduct. Modern military and intelligence operations span global networks, satellite constellations, cyber infrastructure, and advanced research initiatives. The costs are substantial. Throughout these debates, supporters of black budget scrutiny maintain a central claim. Opacity breeds uncertainty. They argue that while secrecy may be justified operationally, the aggregation of classified spending, audit challenges, redactions, and compartmentalization creates an environment where accountability is difficult to assess externally. At the same time, it must be emphasized that no conclusive evidence has publicly demonstrated the existence of unauthorized trillion-dollar accounts operating outside legal structures. The debate persists precisely because the evidence cited is interpretive rather than definitive. Audit discrepancies can be explained as technical reconciliation issues. Redactions can be explained as security precautions. Special access programs can be explained as lawful classification categories. Yet each explanation relies on trust in institutional integrity. Supporters of deeper investigation argue that trust should be supplemented by transparency wherever possible. They do not always assert that vast illegal programs exist. Rather, they contend that the architecture of secrecy leaves open the possibility. In summary, the patterns cited by supporters of black budget scrutiny fall into several categories. Documented audit challenges within large defense systems. Acknowledged classified budget structures with limited public breakdown. Redacted oversight reports and FOIA responses. Existence of special access programs with restricted visibility. Historical precedent for previously concealed programs, later acknowledged. Complex defense contractor relationships with limited public detail. Each element, taken individually, can be explained within official frameworks. Taken together, they form the evidentiary mosaic cited by those who question whether oversight is fully sufficient. The persistence of belief does not rest on a single document or whistleblower claim. It rests on the interplay between scale, secrecy, and institutional complexity. As the narrative evolves in the next section, these patterns will intersect with digital amplification, broader cultural shifts, and formal counter-analysis that seeks to address or refute the claims. For now, what remains is an environment defined not by proof of hidden trillions, but by the enduring question of how much can be evaluated when the details remain classified. Evolution, amplification, and counter-analysis. By the early 2000s, the debate surrounding classified spending had moved beyond congressional hearings and policy journals. It entered the digital era. The structure of the black budget had not fundamentally changed. Classified annexes still accompanied defense bills. Aggregate intelligence numbers were released. Oversight committees continued operating behind closed doors. What changed was the speed and scale of information exchange. Online forums allowed users to upload declassified documents, share archived audit reports, and analyze federal budget spreadsheets collaboratively. Where earlier skepticism had circulated through books and radio programs, it now spread across message boards and emerging social platforms. The timing was significant. After September 11, 2001, intelligence spending rose sharply. Counterterrorism initiatives expanded. Surveillance authorities broadened. The creation of the Department of Homeland Security added another large institutional layer to national security operations. In this climate, classified funding became associated not only with Cold War covert actions, but with domestic surveillance debates, data collection programs, and overseas counterterrorism campaigns. When disclosures later revealed the scope of certain surveillance programs, including bulk metadata collection, public trust was affected. Even though those programs were authorized under specific legal frameworks, their secrecy prior to disclosure reinforced earlier concerns that classified budgets could conceal controversial activities. Digital media accelerated the spread of this perception. Independent YouTube channels began producing investigative-style documentaries about government spending. Podcasts dissected audit reports. Infographics circulated across social networks, claiming that trillions of dollars were unaccounted for. The language used in these discussions often simplified complex accounting terms. Unsupported adjustments became missing money. Classified programs became shadow accounts. The compression of technical nuance into shareable headlines amplified emotional response. Algorithms played a role. Social media platforms reward engagement. Content that evokes surprise, concern, or suspicion tends to spread more widely than technical explanations. As a result, simplified claims about hidden trillions frequently outperformed detailed budget analyses and visibility. The narrative expanded accordingly. Where early skepticism had focused on institutional opacity, newer interpretations connected the black budget to broader themes: mass surveillance, private military contractors, intelligence partnerships with technology companies, and global covert operations. Some commentators argued that classified spending had grown so large that it constituted a parallel infrastructure operating beyond meaningful public control. The term deep state entered popular vocabulary during this period. Although the phrase predates the digital era and has different meanings in different contexts, it became shorthand for the belief that unelected officials within intelligence and defense institutions wield influence independent of electoral cycles. In discussions about the black budget, this concept was sometimes invoked to suggest that classified funding insulated certain programs from democratic accountability. At the same time, mainstream media coverage of defense spending often remained episodic. Stories about audit failures or redacted reports appeared briefly, then faded from headlines. The absence of sustained investigative focus reinforced the perception among some audiences that traditional outlets were either uninterested or constrained. The evolution of conspiracy narratives during this period was marked by increasing scope. Claims expanded from concerns about covert operations to assertions that classified budgets funded massive underground facilities, advanced aerospace research beyond public disclosure, or even projects unrelated to traditional defense objectives. It is important to differentiate between categories. There is documented evidence of classified aerospace testing sites and restricted facilities. There is no verified evidence of unauthorized trillion-dollar parallel economies operating outside legal appropriation structures. However, the presence of confirmed secrecy in one domain often served as a springboard for speculation in others. Financial activism also became part of the conversation. Transparency advocates called for greater disclosure of summary-level data. Some argued that while operational details could remain classified, broader program categories could be described without compromising security. Budget scholars entered the debate with technical counter-analysis. They clarified that the phrase unsupported adjustment refers to accounting reconciliation processes rather than untraceable funds. In large organizations, especially those integrating legacy systems across decades, reconciliation can involve complex internal transfers and documentation challenges. Experts emphasize that audit failure does not equate to missing cash. Instead, it reflects insufficient documentation or incompatible accounting frameworks. Defense analysts also addressed the scale argument. They noted that modern military infrastructure spans global supply chains, advanced research laboratories, satellite networks, cyber operations centers, and personnel benefit systems. The cumulative cost of maintaining such infrastructure is substantial, even without invoking hidden programs. Congressional oversight defenders argued that intelligence committees receive detailed briefings and that classified annexes include granular program breakdowns. They contended that elected officials with clearance are positioned to scrutinize spending in ways the general public cannot. Some former intelligence officials publicly stated that while bureaucratic inefficiencies exist, the idea of completely unauthorized trillion-dollar accounts operating undetected is implausible within the current statutory framework. They pointed to internal controls, multi-layered review processes, and the legal risks associated with misappropriation. Logical inconsistencies within more expansive conspiracy narratives were highlighted by skeptics. If trillions of dollars were diverted annually without authorization, they argued, the scale of coordination required would involve thousands of individuals across agencies, contractors, and oversight bodies. Maintaining absolute silence among such a large group would be extraordinarily difficult. Whistleblower protections and investigative journalism further complicate the feasibility of sustained concealment on that scale. Yet skepticism persisted. Part of the reason lies in the psychological dimension. Complex systems are difficult to understand fully. Federal budgeting spans thousands of pages. Accounting language is technical. When explanations rely on specialized terminology, they can appear evasive even when accurate. Humans tend to prefer clear narratives over technical nuance. A headline declaring trillions unaccounted for is easier to process than an explanation of reconciliation entries across incompatible accounting systems. Another factor is historical precedent. Documented intelligence abuses during the 20th century established that secrecy can conceal wrongdoing. Even if modern oversight structures differ significantly from those of earlier decades, the memory of past misconduct influences present interpretation. The financial crisis of 2008 also shaped public perception. Large institutions were revealed to have engaged in risky or opaque financial practices. Government bailouts were implemented rapidly. Trust in economic oversight declined in some segments of the population. In that broader climate of institutional skepticism, classified spending appeared less like a neutral security mechanism and more like another example of concentrated power. Influencers and independent filmmakers capitalized on this climate. Long-form online documentaries framed the black budget as a hidden engine driving global events. Some productions relied on careful archival research and cautious language. Others used dramatic presentation and sweeping conclusions. Viral moments amplified the conversation. Clips from congressional hearings, stripped of context, circulated widely. Budget figures were displayed without explanation of proportional breakdown. Redacted documents were presented as visual proof of concealment. At the same time, government agencies increased public communication efforts. Officials emphasized that intelligence professionals operate under legal constraints and oath-bound responsibilities. They pointed to Inspector General investigations as evidence that internal accountability mechanisms function. Reports summarizing oversight activity were released in redacted but publicly accessible form. Agencies attempted to balance transparency with security. Despite these efforts, belief in expansive black budget narratives remained durable among certain audiences. Why does belief continue even when counter-analysis is available? One reason is asymmetry of information. Counter-arguments often require technical explanation. They rely on trust in accounting expertise and institutional statements. By contrast, claims of hidden trillions offer a more intuitive storyline. Secrecy plus large numbers equals hidden power. Another reason is confirmation bias. Individuals predisposed to distrust institutions are more likely to interpret ambiguity as evidence of concealment. Audit failures reinforce this interpretation, even if technical explanations exist. The structure of classified annexes also sustains uncertainty. Because the public cannot access detailed line items, definitive independent verification is impossible. Even if oversight committees function effectively, their work remains largely invisible. This invisibility sustains narrative tension. In recent years, discussions of space-based defense systems, artificial intelligence research, and advanced cyber capabilities have renewed interest in classified spending. As technological competition intensifies globally, intelligence budgets remain substantial. Each new geopolitical crisis or emerging technology provides context for continued classified investment. The debate, therefore, has evolved into a cyclical pattern. Classified spending increases in response to perceived threats. Audit challenges or redactions prompt renewed scrutiny. Digital platforms amplify claims. Experts provide counter-analysis. Belief persists in certain communities. What distinguishes the current era from earlier waves is the scale of amplification. Where earlier skepticism circulated through limited channels, today's narratives can reach millions within hours. Algorithms do not evaluate nuance. They prioritize engagement. This dynamic complicates public understanding. On one side, the official framework asserts legality, oversight, and necessity. On the other, critics emphasize opacity, complexity, and historical precedent. Between these poles lies a large segment of the public attempting to reconcile trust in national security with concern for transparency. The black budget, in this sense, has become more than a financial category. It has become a symbol. For some, it symbolizes responsible secrecy in a dangerous world. For others, it symbolizes concentrated power beyond public view. Neither interpretation fully resolves the tension. As the narrative moves toward its conclusion, the focus shifts from amplification and rebuttal to impact. How this ongoing debate shapes public perception, institutional trust, and the broader relationship between secrecy and democracy. The black budget remains a documented structure within federal governance. Its interpretation, however, continues to evolve alongside technology, media, and political culture. Impact and uncertainty. By this point, the structure is clear. Classified spending exists. Oversight mechanisms exist. Audit challenges exist. Suspicion exists. What remains unsettled is how these realities coexist in the public imagination. The black budget is not only a financial category, it has become a cultural symbol, one that reflects deeper anxieties about power, trust, and visibility in modern governance. In democratic societies, legitimacy depends not only on lawful authority, but on perceived accountability. Citizens may never expect to see the operational details of intelligence missions, but they often expect reassurance that oversight is meaningful and effective. When secrecy intersects with vast financial scale, reassurance becomes more difficult. The psychological impact of opacity should not be underestimated. Humans are pattern-seeking by nature. When information is incomplete, the mind attempts to fill gaps. Ambiguity can generate multiple interpretations. In the case of classified budgets, those interpretations range from cautious acceptance to deep suspicion. Large numbers amplify this effect. When defense and intelligence expenditures are measured in hundreds of billions annually and trillions cumulatively over decades, abstraction sets in. Few individuals can intuitively grasp sums of that magnitude. Without context, scale alone can evoke unease. That unease does not automatically imply wrongdoing, but it does create fertile ground for doubt. Culturally, the black budget debate reflects a broader tension in contemporary life: the imbalance between institutional knowledge and public visibility. Modern governments operate complex technological systems, satellite networks, cyber defense infrastructure, artificial intelligence research platforms that few citizens fully understand. The more specialized and technical a system becomes, the more it relies on expertise concentrated within institutions. This concentration can feel distant. At the same time, media ecosystems have changed. Headlines often emphasize controversy. Phrases like "unaccounted trillions" attract attention more readily than explanations about reconciliation entries or legacy accounting systems. Short-form content distills multi-page reports into single sentences. Nuance is compressed. Algorithms amplify engagement, not necessarily precision. As a result, the black budget debate often unfolds in fragments, isolated quotes, cropped hearing clips, partial audit excerpts, rather than in comprehensive review. Trust becomes the central variable. For individuals who view institutions as broadly reliable, classified spending appears as a pragmatic necessity in a competitive world. Oversight committees, inspectors general, and statutory frameworks provide sufficient reassurance. For those who view institutions as opaque or self-protective, classified spending appears as a structural vulnerability, an area where democratic transparency is constrained. Neither perception emerges in isolation. They are shaped by historical experience. The 20th century offers documented examples of intelligence agencies conducting covert actions later judged controversial or unlawful. The Church Committee reforms exist precisely because oversight once proved insufficient. That historical memory informs contemporary skepticism. At the same time, global security environments remain volatile. Cyber intrusions, geopolitical rivalries, terrorism, and emerging technologies require sophisticated intelligence capabilities. Operational secrecy can protect lives and strategic stability. The tension between these realities is ongoing. One unresolved element lies in audit transparency. The Department of Defense continues working toward improved financial accountability. Public acknowledgement of audit challenges demonstrates institutional recognition of complexity. Yet, repeated audit failures reinforce perception of systemic opacity. Another unresolved element involves the scope of special access programs. While the existence of such programs is acknowledged, their details remain classified. The public must rely on oversight bodies to ensure legality and fiscal discipline. Conflicting testimony also contributes to uncertainty. Former officials occasionally describe compartmentalization that limits cross-agency visibility. Current officials emphasize layered review and statutory compliance. Without access to classified annexes, external observers cannot independently verify either portrayal. The result is not definitive proof of hidden trillions. It is persistent ambiguity. Open questions remain. How much secrecy is necessary for effective intelligence operations? At what threshold does classification undermine democratic confidence? Is aggregate budget disclosure sufficient, or should additional summary-level information be released? Can oversight conducted entirely behind closed doors satisfy public expectations of accountability? These questions are not new. They have accompanied classified spending since its inception in the Cold War era. But they carry renewed urgency in an age where information spreads instantly and skepticism can scale globally. There is also a broader philosophical dimension. Democracy operates on consent of the governed. Consent does not require universal access to every operational detail. It requires belief that systems function within lawful boundaries. When citizens feel excluded from understanding how funds are used, even if for legitimate reasons, that belief can erode. Conversely, when sensitive capabilities are exposed prematurely, national security can be compromised. The black budget debate sits precisely at that intersection. It reflects not only concerns about money, but about visibility. Who sees, who decides, and who verifies. It is also worth acknowledging that secrecy is not inherently synonymous with corruption. Many classified programs later declassified have demonstrated legitimate strategic value. At the same time, secrecy can conceal mistakes, inefficiencies, or misconduct if oversight fails. The durability of black budget narratives arises from this dual possibility. If oversight functions perfectly, secrecy protects security. If oversight falters, secrecy protects error. From the outside, distinguishing between the two can be difficult. That difficulty sustains discussion. In the end, the black budget remains a documented feature of federal governance. Its aggregate totals are public. Its internal details are classified. Oversight exists, though not in public view. Audit challenges persist, though explanations are technical rather than conspiratorial. What remains unresolved is not whether the black budget exists, but how much transparency is enough. Some advocate for expanded summary disclosure without compromising operational specifics. Others caution that even incremental transparency can reveal strategic vulnerabilities. The conversation is unlikely to end. As long as intelligence operations require secrecy, and as long as democratic systems rely on trust, the balance will be debated. Perhaps the most important takeaway is perspective. The presence of classification does not automatically confirm hidden agendas. The presence of redaction does not automatically confirm concealment of wrongdoing. The presence of audit complexity does not automatically confirm missing funds. But neither does institutional assurance automatically resolve public concern. The black budget is less a single mystery than an ongoing negotiation between visibility and security. It challenges citizens to consider how much they need to know and how much they are willing to entrust to elected representatives and oversight bodies. It challenges institutions to maintain accountability within secrecy. And it challenges both sides to navigate complexity without collapsing into certainty unsupported by evidence. As with many debates surrounding power and transparency, the most honest conclusion may be uncertainty. The system operates largely as described in official frameworks. At the same time, its inner workings remain inaccessible to the general public. Oversight exists, but it is not visible. Audit reform is underway, but not complete. Whether that balance is sufficient depends on perspective. This documentary has explored publicly available records, historical precedent, and ongoing debate. It has not asserted hidden programs as fact. It has examined the structures that exist in the questions that follow. This documentary is presented for informational and discussion purposes only. It is based on publicly available records, official reports, academic analysis, and documented commentary. It does not assert unverified claims as fact, nor does it intend to defame, misrepresent, or accuse any institution, organization, or individual. Viewers are encouraged to consult primary sources and multiple perspectives when forming conclusions. The black budget exists. Its interpretation remains debated. The tension between secrecy and transparency continues. Thank you for watching Whims and Whispers. If you found this exploration valuable, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Your support allows deeper research into complex and often misunderstood topics. And in the spirit of open discussion, let us know in the comments. Which historical mystery or modern controversy should we examine next? Until next time, stay curious and stay thoughtful.